Ever wonder which Elvis songs might make you giggle instead of swoon? Did the king of rock and roll occasionally miss the mark when it came to serious songs? Elvis Presley remains one of the most iconic figures in music history, with a voice that could melt hearts and a charisma that changed popular culture forever. But even legends have their moments where things don't quite land as intended. Sometimes the king delivered songs that, whether through outdated lyrics, over-the-top delivery, or just plain weirdness, come across as unintentionally funny to modern ears. Number 1. Old Shep, 1956. Is there anything more awkward than Elvis singing earnestly about shooting his dog? This track, from Elvis's early career, attempts to be a heartfelt tribute to man's best friend, but somehow turns into something that modern listeners might find more comical than touching. Old Shep tells the story of a boy and his beloved dog companion. The narrative starts innocently enough, with Elvis crooning about his childhood pet in a tender, emotional voice that suggests we're in for a touching ballad. The melody is simple, almost childlike, with minimal instrumentation that puts the focus squarely on Elvis's voice and the story he's telling. The song progresses predictably enough, with Elvis reminiscing about the good times with his faithful canine friend. But then comes the twist. Old Shep gets sick, really sick. And what happens next is where modern listeners tend to raise their eyebrows. As Shep's condition worsens, the song's narrator, Elvis, is advised by his father to take the dog out and essentially put him out of his misery with a rifle. The way Elvis delivers the line about being unable to shoot his dog with such dramatic, quivering emotion crosses into territory that many contemporary listeners find unintentionally funny. His voice cracks with such theatrical sorrow that it's hard not to smirk a little, especially when he sings, "I just couldn't do it. I wanted to run." The melodrama reaches a fever pitch as Elvis describes watching Old Shep close his eyes for the last time while he was kneeling there by his side. The song was actually recorded when Elvis was only 21, and his youth shows in the somewhat overwrought delivery. What was meant to be a sorrowful country ballad, it was originally recorded by Red Foley in 1941, becomes in Elvis's hands something that sounds almost like a parody of emotional country songs about dogs. Adding to the unintentional comedy is the fact that this song appears on the same album as some of Elvis's most electrifying rock and roll numbers. The whiplash of going from blue suede shoes to a melodramatic ballad about shooting a sick dog is jarring, to say the least. Elvis actually had a personal connection to the song. He performed it at age 10 in the Youth Talent Contest, making his first public singing appearance. Perhaps this emotional attachment explains the excessive feeling he pours into every line. But for modern listeners unfamiliar with this context, hearing the king of rock and roll emote so dramatically about Old Shep's demise often elicits more chuckles than tears. Number 2. No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car, 1963. Can you imagine Elvis seriously singing about the difficulties of dancing in a compact vehicle? This song from the film Fun in Acapulco might be the most ridiculous premise for a song in the Presley catalog. During the 1960s, Elvis was deep into his movie career, churning out formulaic films that required equally formulaic songs. No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car epitomizes everything that was wrong with this era of Elvis's career. And that's precisely what makes it so unintentionally hilarious today. The premise is exactly what the title suggests. Elvis lamenting that his sports car is too small for him to dance the rumba with his lady friend. That's it. That's the entire concept. The song opens with Elvis complaining, "There's no room to rumba in a sports car, too uncomfortable to samba in a sports car." As if this is a common problem that listeners would relate to. The production doesn't help matters. The track features cartoonish horn sections and percussion that sounds like it belongs in a novelty song, which, let's be honest, is exactly what this is. But the funniest part might be that Elvis delivers these absurd lyrics with complete commitment and sincerity. There's no wink to the audience, no acknowledgement of how ridiculous the premise is. When Elvis sings lines like, "We need room for basic mambo when there's no room for fancy footwork in a little bitty sports car," it's impossible not to imagine him and co-star Ursula Andress attempting to perform Latin dance moves while crammed into a tiny convertible. The visual is inherently comical, made even more so by Elvis's earnest delivery. The song clocks in at under 2 minutes, suggesting that even the songwriters couldn't stretch this concept any further. But in that brief time, it manages to repeat the core complaint enough times to cement itself as one of the most absurd entries in the Elvis catalog. What makes "No Room to Rumba" in a sports car particularly funny from a modern perspective is how it represents everything that was going wrong with Elvis's career during the movie years. Instead of pushing musical boundaries like he had in the 1950s, he was recording disposable soundtrack songs with increasingly ridiculous premises. The song serves as a perfect time capsule of the kind of material Elvis was forced to record during his Hollywood years. Songs that were beneath his talent and would eventually lead to his famous '68 comeback special, where he reclaimed his rock and roll throne. But until then, he was stuck belting out tunes about the dancing limitations of luxury vehicles. Number 3. Song of the Shrimp, 1962. Have you ever heard a grown man sing from the perspective of a shrimp facing its mortality? In this bizarre track from the movie, Girls, 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 Elvis takes on the role of narrator, telling the tragic tale of a small crustacean's journey from the ocean to the dinner plate. Song of the Shrimp might be the strangest narrative song Elvis ever recorded. The track begins innocently enough, with a gentle, almost lullaby-like melody. But then, Elvis starts singing, and the bizarre story unfolds. The song tells the story of a little shrimp swimming in the ocean, minding its own business, when suddenly it's caught in a net. Elvis narrates the entire life cycle of this unfortunate shellfish, from capture to cooking pot, with unexpected emotional investment. The chorus features the memorable line, "Swim, swim, swim," said the mama fishy. "Swim if you can," delivered with complete seriousness by the man known as the King. What makes the track so unintentionally hilarious is the contrast between the subject matter and Elvis's delivery. He sings with the same emotional resonance he brought to ballads about human heartbreak and longing, except here he's lamenting the fate of seafood. When Elvis croons, "And then, one day, a big fisherman's net came his way," there's genuine pathos in his voice, as if he's describing a Greek tragedy rather than everyday commercial fishing. The production doesn't help matters. The song features a cheery, Hawaiian-influenced arrangement, complete with ukulele and steel guitars, creating a sunny backdrop for what is essentially a shrimp's death march. There's even a bubbling water sound effect at one point, just in case listeners needed help visualizing the shrimp's underwater habitat. By the end of the song, the shrimp meets its inevitable fate on a dinner plate, with Elvis solemnly narrating. There on a plate for all to see was the little bitty shrimp from the deep blue sea. The juxtaposition of the serious tone with the absurd subject matter creates a perfect storm of unintentional comedy. What makes Song of the Shrimp particularly fascinating is that it wasn't just a throwaway album track. It was featured prominently in the film Girls, Girls, Girls. Elvis actually performs this song on screen, sitting on a boat, serenading a group of children about the life and death of a crustacean. The visual of Elvis Presley, at the height of his movie star fame, earnestly singing about a shrimp's journey to the dinner table, is something that has to be seen to be believed. The song exemplifies the often bizarre material Elvis was given during his movie career. While he was making films at a rapid pace throughout the early 1960s, the quality of the songs he was recording often suffered. Song of the Shrimp stands as perhaps the most outlandish example, a track that must have raised eyebrows even in 1962, but which modern listeners find absolutely hysterical. Number 4. There's no room to Rhumba in a sports car. 1963. Did Elvis really record multiple songs about dancing limitations in vehicles? This spectacular miscalculation appears in the film Fun in Acapulco and represents everything that went wrong during Elvis's movie years. Wait, didn't we already cover this song? Yes and no. No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car was so unintentionally hilarious that it warranted inclusion twice. Just kidding. This entry represents a common confusion in Elvis's catalog, where slightly different versions or alternate takes of essentially the same song exist. The repeated inclusion here mirrors how redundant some of Elvis's movie songs became during his film career, often reworking the same concepts with minor variations. What makes this particular track winkingly funny is that it represents a broader pattern in Elvis's film career. Repetitive songs with increasingly thin premises. During the 1960s, Elvis was starring in formulaic films that required equally formulaic musical numbers, often centered around whatever location or activity was featured in the movie. In Fun in Acapulco, Elvis plays a former trapeze artist working as a lifeguard and singer in Mexico. The film required Latin-influenced numbers, hence the Rhumba reference. But the songwriters seem to struggle to connect the Latin dance theme with the sports car Elvis drives in the film, resulting in this conceptually absurd song. The production takes the comedy to another level. With exaggerated Latin percussion and horns that sound like they belong in a cartoon chase scene, the track feels like it's trying desperately to convince you of its authenticity while missing the mark entirely. Elvis's vocal performance adds to the humor. He attacks the song with gusto, as if he's performing jailhouse rock rather than a novelty song about dancing in confined spaces. What modern listeners find particularly amusing is imagining the recording session for this track. Elvis, one of the most influential and talented vocalists of his generation, standing in a studio, seriously delivering lines like, "We need room for basic mambo," while professional musicians provided the backing track. It's a scene that perfectly encapsulates the artistic compromises of Elvis's Hollywood years. By 1963, Elvis hadn't had a substantial hit record in years, as his energy was diverted to making 3 movies annually. The films made money, but the musical quality suffered enormously. Songs like "There's No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car" show just how far the once revolutionary rocker had strayed from his groundbreaking early work. The song becomes even funnier when contrasted with what Elvis's contemporaries were doing at the time. While he was singing about dance space and automobiles, the Beatles were about to invade America and change popular music forever. Bob Dylan was writing poetic, socially conscious lyrics that would influence generations. And Elvis, the original rock revolutionary, was stuck with material that wouldn't even pass muster as a novelty B-side for lesser artists. But perhaps the most unintentionally hilarious aspect of the song is that Elvis performs it with absolute conviction. There's no irony, no winking at the camera. Just Elvis, fully committed to selling this ridiculous concept to the audience. And that earnestness in the face of such absurd material is what makes it comedy gold for modern listeners. Number 5. U.S. Mail, 1968. Ever heard a grown man make postal puns for 3 straight minutes? This song from 1968 features Elvis playing with wordplay around mail mail, with an intensity that's both impressive and slightly concerning. U.S. Mail represents a curious moment in Elvis's career. Released in 1968, just months before his famous comeback special would reinvigorate his career, the song catches Elvis in an odd transitional period. He was moving away from the lightweight movie songs, but hadn't yet reclaimed his rock and roll throne. The song itself is built entirely around an extended pun on Mail versus Malway, with Elvis positioning himself as a tough territorial U.S. male who warns other men to stay away from his woman. The word play is hammered home with references to postal service terminology throughout. Elvis is first class, mentions air mail, and warns rivals not to handle his mail. What makes the song so unintentionally funny is how seriously Elvis commits to this concept. He delivers lines like, "I'm a U.S. male, and don't you forget it," with the same intensity he brought to Heartbreak Hotel or Suspicious Minds. There's a growling, almost threatening quality to his delivery that seems wildly disproportionate to the lightweight pun that forms the song's foundation. The backing track doesn't help matters. The arrangement features a talking blues style with prominent bass and drums, guitar picking, and an almost comically deep-voiced backing vocalist repeating U.S. Mail after Elvis. The production seems designed to emphasize Elvis's masculinity and toughness, which only heightens the contrast with the goofy wordplay at the heart of the song. When Elvis declares, "If you're looking for trouble, just keep on messing around with my U.S. female," it's hard not to smile at the strained wordplay. The song reaches peak unintentional comedy when Elvis warns, "So handle with care this U.S. mail," and follows it with a karate-inspired "Hi-ya!" grunt, a nod to his growing interest in martial arts at the time. What modern listeners find particularly amusing is that U.S. Mail actually reached pound 28 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. This wasn't some obscure album track or movie song. It was a legitimate single that people bought and radio stations played. The song was written by Jerry Reed, who plays guitar on the recording, and represents a curious attempt to give Elvis more relevant material as the 1960s progressed. The song also unintentionally highlights the gender politics of the era. Elvis portrays a possessive, almost threatening character who refers to his girlfriend as "my U.S. female," effectively marking her as his territory alongside the postal puns. What might have seemed like standard masculine posturing in 1968 comes across as comically over the top and slightly uncomfortable to modern ears. U.S. Mail stands as a perfect example of Elvis trying to adapt to changing times, but not quite finding the right formula. It's neither the pure rock and roll of his early years, nor the mature balladeering of his later comeback period. Instead, it's caught in an awkward middle ground where Elvis is trying too hard to be both relevant and tough, resulting in a track that's hard to take seriously from a contemporary perspective. Number 6. Do the Clam, 1965. Would you believe Elvis once released a song instructing people how to do a made-up dance about a mollusk? This track from the film Girl Happy might be the most ridiculous dance craze song ever recorded by a major artist. By 1965, Elvis was deep into his movie career, churning out formulaic films with equally formulaic soundtracks. Girl Happy was his 17th film, and like many of his movies from this period, it required a dance craze song, something that could potentially launch a new dance trend like the twist or the mashed potato. The result was Do the Clam, perhaps the most absurd entry in this already questionable subgenre. The song opens with Elvis enthusiastically instructing listeners. Here's a new dance you should know. Hey baby, do the clam. What follows is a detailed explanation of this fictional dance, which apparently involves bending your knees, clapping your hands, and spinning around while digging that clam. What makes Do the Clam so unintentionally hilarious is that Elvis delivers these instructions with complete conviction, as if teaching the world an established, legitimate dance move rather than a ridiculous invention created solely for a beach movie plot point. There's not a hint of irony in his delivery as he belts out lines like, "Dig right in and do the clam, hey." The backing track compounds the comedy with its surf rock-inspired arrangement featuring prominent saxophones, Supplicic guitar chords, and backing vocalists who echo Elvis's instructions with matching enthusiasm. The production is designed to sound youthful and energetic, but to modern ears, it comes across as an awkward attempt by middle-aged music industry professionals to fabricate youth culture. In the film, Elvis performs this song at a beach club, surrounded by young people who immediately pick up on the dance, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. The visual of dozens of extras earnestly doing the clam, while Elvis guides them through this nonsensical routine, is a perfect time capsule of everything that had gone wrong with his career by this point. What makes Do the Clam particularly funny, from a historical perspective, is that it was released the same year as the Beatles' Help, and yesterday the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction, and Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone, songs that were revolutionizing popular music with their artistic ambition and lyrical depth. Meanwhile, Elvis was instructing teenagers on how to pretend to be a bivalve mollusk. The song represents a low point in Elvis's creative output, but that's precisely what makes it so unintentionally amusing today. The disconnect between the Elvis who shocked the world in the 1950s with his provocative performances and this Elvis earnestly leading a fictional dance craze about clams couldn't be more stark. Adding to the humor is the fact that Do the Clam was actually released as a single and reached pound 21 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The king of rock and roll, one of the most influential musical artists of all time, had a top 40 hit with a song about pretending to be a shellfish. It's a fact that seems almost impossible to believe in retrospect. Do the Clam stands as perhaps the most perfect example of how far Elvis had strayed from his ground-reigning early work during his movie years. What was meant to be youthful and trendy now seems hopelessly square and manufactured, creating an unintentional comedy that's far more entertaining than the song ever was as a legitimate dance track. Number 7. Edge of Reality, 1968. Can Cytelia get any weirder than Elvis pretending to be on a trip? This bizarre attempt to capitalize on the counterculture movement finds Elvis venturing into psychedelic territory with hilariously square results. As the 1960s progressed, popular music was transformed by psychedelic rock and the counterculture movement. Artists like the Beatles, the Doors, and Jefferson Airplane were exploring mind expansion through music, often inspired by psychedelic drug experiences. Elvis, meanwhile, was still making formulaic movies and recording their soundtracks. Edge of Reality represents his belated attempt to engage with the psychedelic trend, with results that modern listeners find unintentionally hilarious. The song appeared in the 1968 film Live a Little, Love a Little, one of Elvis's more unusual movies that actually tried to acknowledge the changing cultural landscape. Edge of Reality accompanies a dream sequence where Elvis, after being drugged by his love interest's dog, yes really, experiences a psychedelic hallucination complete with swirling colors, multiple versions of the leading lady, and surreal imagery. What makes Edge of Reality so funny to contemporary ears is how it demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of psychedelic music. Rather than the exploratory boundary-pushing approach of genuine psychedelic artists, Elvis's song feels like a corporate boardroom's idea of what trippy music should sound like. The production features predictable elements like reverb-heavy vocals, flanging effects, and a theatrical string arrangement, but they're applied with such a heavy hand that the result feels more like a parody than an authentic entry in the genre. Elvis's vocal performance adds another layer of unintentional comedy. He sings with operatic intensity, his voice soaring dramatically as he describes being on the edge of reality and feeling, "My mind start to wander to places I've never been." There's a theatrical quality to his delivery that stands in stark contrast to the more naturalistic exploratory vocal styles that characterized actual psychedelic music of the era. The lyrics compound the humor with their excessive, on-the-nose quality. Lines like "colors all around me creating ecstasy" and "illusions everywhere, fantasy so rare" read like someone's first attempt at writing trippy lyrics after having psychedelic experiences described to them secondhand. The song never ventures into the poetic abstraction or deeply personal introspection that defined the best psychedelic music. Instead, it remains firmly in the realm of surface-level descriptions of weirdness. What modern listeners find particularly amusing is the contrast between Elvis's squeaky, clean establishment, friendly image, and the counterculture movement he's attempting to tap into. By 1968, Elvis was the definition of mainstream entertainment, while psychedelic music was associated with rebellion, drug use, and radical politics. The attempt to bridge these worlds results in something that feels like your parents' version of what hippie culture was all about. The song becomes even funnier when viewed alongside the film sequence it accompanies. Elvis, dressed in a conventional suit for most of the movie, suddenly appears in a slightly more colorful shirt for the dream sequence. Apparently, the costume department's idea of psychedelic fashion. He wanders through obviously artificial sets with a confused expression while the camera employs rudimentary special effects to create the trippy visuals. Edge of Reality was released the same year as Elvis's famous '68 comeback special, which would successfully reinvigorate his career by returning to his rock and roll roots rather than chasing contemporary trends. The contrast between the authentic power of his performance in that special and the forced sectilia of Edge of Reality couldn't be more stark, and that's precisely what makes the song so unintentionally funny from a historical perspective. The track stands as a perfect example of what happens when mainstream entertainment attempts to co-opt a countercultural movement without understanding its substance. The result is neither convincing sectilia nor effective Elvis, just a gloriously misconceived hybrid that modern listeners can't help but chuckle at. Did you ever imagine the king of rock and roll could make you laugh as much as he makes you swoon? Which other Elvis songs do you think deserve a spot on this unintentionally hilarious list?